The SEC championship game happened yesterday. We were there, fueled by Quick Trip, no less. We went down to Atlanta. A bunch of our friends of the program were there. We did the ESPN Altcast. I'll tell you guys about that in a little while. That was amazing. A lot of you tuned in for that, I'm told. The game gets 1.5 Chali. And that's music to the ears of Georgia fans because finally you exercise a lot of the demons that you've had against Alabama and you're able to celebrate in the fourth quarter. I was on the Georgia sideline last night. I will tell you, it wasn't quite the TCU game from a few years ago. Like they weren't going to the concessions and getting chicken wings and eating them on the sideline. It wasn't that bad. But there were a lot of, top button undone, arms spread over the bleachers, sort of just leaned back, taking it all in the fourth quarter of that game. So what have we said on this show about Georgia all year? You got to cut the head off the snake. And several teams had the chance to cut the head off the snake that is Georgia, and you didn't cut the head off the snake. You remember the Tennessee game earlier this year? Went to overtime. Tennessee misses a field goal that would have won the game. Could have been another loss, but it wasn't. Bama beat them in the regular season. That was their only blemish. You remember the Auburn game? Georgia just totally dead in the water. Could have been down 17-0 at half. Instead, it's 10-3 at the half. Auburn couldn't cut the head off the snake. Florida, they're down late in the fourth quarter, and they have to drive to win that game. Florida had a chance to really kind of define and stamp their season, but they couldn't cut the head off the snake. Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin are up 2 possessions on Georgia in Athens, second half, fourth quarter even. Georgia comes back to win, couldn't cut the head off the snake. So many people gripped that shovel. So many people tried, and Georgia just last minute darts to the left, darts to the right, and what ends up happening? They faced Texas 3 weeks ago, and they stuff them in a locker, and everyone leaves going, uh-oh, we didn't cut the head off the snake. And then they do what they did against Georgia Tech last week. I know that looks like a close game. That game never felt like it was in doubt. And they go right back to that same building 8 days later, and it's another of many, many examples of how unmatched I think Georgia's competitive character is in the SEC. You could argue Ohio State nationally, and that's about the only one that I would listen to from a pure competitive culture standpoint. That doesn't mean you're going to win every game, but it does mean if you beat Georgia, you brought your A game to do it. Very, very rarely do they do it for you. And also, I think it's such a testament, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, to how hard they keep coaching all year. It's not a situation where you coach hard in the spring and then summer and then fall camp, and then once you get to week 1, you just are who you are. No, it's like a starting point for them. But the culture has been questioned at times around Georgia. I've always pushed back on it, and I've taken a lot of heat for it. Because when they had the off-the-field incidents that happened in droves a couple of years ago, everyone said, oh, Georgia's culture sucks. Georgia's culture competitively doesn't suck. And believe me, I know what the pushback there is. The pushback was then and still is probably, oh, just because you stack a bunch of great football players on top of each other, that's not indication of culture. Anyone can win when you have great players. No, they can't. No, they can't. Also, there's a lot of skill in stacking the great players because they don't really cut corners there to do it. If you're familiar with the Georgia recruiting approach, you know they're not always going to outspend you, and they're not really going to apologize or sugarcoat what it's like there because they count on that being a filtration part of the recruiting process, and they don't want every 4 and 5 star to come through that filter. They want the filter to catch a lot of the guys that would melt inside Georgia. I was standing there talking to someone last night, and they said, man, I can't believe Alabama didn't get up for this game. And I kind of laughed. I said, what do you mean get up? He said, man, they just didn't get up. Like Georgia got up this week. It's so obvious. They didn't get up this week any more than they normally would. They played a pretty good game last night. They played a 3-phase game. They were very effective. They dominated the game. But please understand, that's not Georgia getting up. It's not about the music you listen to the day of the game or the inspirational video you watch the night before the game or the text that your uncle sends you in all caps or the bus ride over there. That's not how you win games. They got up for this game in February. They got up for the game the third week of April. They get up for the game with the decisions they make on a random Tuesday morning in July when they could be home if they want to, or how they handle a practice in the middle of the season when they may have like Austin P on deck. It's a standard. That's what competitive culture is. And anybody who dips below that standard, they don't last at places like that very long. And I say places like that, there really aren't many. But it's on display in games like last night. So this wasn't some vintage, high-flying blowout effort. What it was a very, very complimentary approach where they just suffocated Alabama. -3 rushing yards is impressive, and I don't really care who you're facing. But dominance looks like that. So dominance is Georgia scoring 4 touchdowns with 3 drives starting in Alabama territory. That's a blocked punt. That's an interception. And their 4th scoring drive, I think, started on the Bama 43. Special teams tilted the field so hard. This is like what Oklahoma did to Alabama, by the way. You want a paper popper. Georgia's starting field position average was their 40-yard line. Alabama's average starting field position was their 18-yard line. This is another one. A lot of paper poppers. Kirby gave us a record number of paper poppers. 12 Bama drives last night. None of them started at better than the Alabama 25-yard line. So the best start that Bama had last night, they had 75 yards to go to score a touchdown. Georgia 4 of 4 in the red zone. Alabama was held to negative rushing yardage. And honestly, I was standing on the field, so you don't exactly know where those numbers are stacking up. But the one thing that was very apparent, as a guy who also stood on the field to watch Georgia-Texas, is it felt like the Georgia-Texas game. They had 3 sacks. That's great. They had 18 pressures on Ty Simpson. And that's kind of what they did to Arch, and that's kind of what that front has done to Texas a few times that they've played them. They hadn't handled Alabama like that until last night. I know Bama's banged up. Everyone's banged up. No one needs to make the excuse for me. Hey, do me one favor right here. Look down. Are you subscribed to the channel? If you are, thank you. If you're not, please click subscribe. It helps us keep the show free and free of corporate interference. All right, that's it for me. Back to the clip. That performance from a Georgia pass rush and a Georgia front that's gotten healthier and it's continued to elevate. That second part's the most important part. Their football players are playing their best right now. That stood out. Like, yeah, there may have been some miracle where Alabama just threads the needle, but they were going to have to do that. And by the way, the Bama defense, when I was driving out of there, I heard some fans talking about Kane Womack. Oh, man, Bama's defense dropped the ball. Dude, Alabama's defense was the least of their problems last night. Missing LT Overton, and still Georgia's longest play was 19 yards, guys. You can't give average starting field position like that. You can't let that many drives start in your territory and look and say, all right, defense, we're not going to do anything to help you out. We're not going to score. I mean, we couldn't throw our way out of a wet paper bag. We certainly couldn't run our way through tissue right now. Don't you let them score, though. Yeah, that's not the way football really works. So it was a very disappointing performance by Alabama, but, man, that has a lot to do with the team lined up across from them. But the whole take that we had coming into this one, I picked Georgia to win a close game. The reason you don't ever want to give them Bama is because they've had this mental edge against Georgia. But also, you do know there's this tightrope that Alabama offensively has to walk. If they walk it, they can win. But the point is the tightrope walk. Every Alabama drive feels like a tightrope walk. And the whole thing about a tightrope walk is if you make it to the other side, it's great. It's legendary. Everyone remembers it. Why do they remember it? Because the risk is you fall off the tightrope. And if everything doesn't go right, if everything's not clicking right now because they can't run the ball and that offensive line's banged up, and I would argue Josh Cuevas, number 80 for him, is an extremely underappreciated facet of their offense. He didn't play last night. And so you got freshman tailbacks, which makes the tailback pass ineffective out of the backfield. You don't have your usual third down safety valve in Cuevas. Your offensive line's beat to death. If you don't walk the tightrope, you die. They weren't able to walk the tightrope last night. That's kind of why I've been phrasing it like that. It's cool when it works, but Georgia threw the crowbar in the spokes last night. That's exactly what happened. Now, because we know now that Alabama's made the playoff, the following question is how much healthier can they get? And they've got confidence they can get a fair amount healthier, obviously, than they were last night. But the reason I'm not focusing on health a whole lot is because, guys, Georgia played without their starting center last night. And Tim Keenan, I mean, coming back from injury the first time these teams played, was fully healthy last night. And that was not even a focal point of that game much. We got to the fourth quarter, and I looked at Lawan and I said, have we even mentioned the lack of Drew Bobo tonight? Have we even mentioned his absence? No. Did you hear Kirby Smart after this game? One of the reasons why I kept hammering the drum that Alabama losing that game was not going to cost them a playoff spot is because the SEC was not going to allow that to happen. I don't mean they technically control the playoff committee. I mean the playoff committee was well aware. If we remove a participant from the playoff or from the playoff that was in the SEC championship game that otherwise would have been in the playoff, it is curtains as far as the SEC is concerned. They were going to go scorched earth. Kirby made a good point in his post-game press conference last night. He said, we're about to move to 9 conference games. You just witnessed our 9th league game this year. Us and Alabama just played our 9th league game. And it's like Georgia, the winning team, crawls to the podium with cuts and scrapes all over and their mouths bleeding and they may be concussed, figuratively, of course. And they're like, that's the winning team. And he said, you know, he talked about Alabama. He said they're beat to death too. Like, that's their 9th league game. That's just what we're going to voluntarily enter ourselves into. And then this would be the 10th SEC game that some of us play. And he said there's a lot of concern around the league right now. A lot of people think that's whining until they come and coach or play in the SEC and they find out, like, this is the only league where the bad teams have a whole bunch of Sunday talent. This is like in the SEC, the way recruiting is Dylan Stewart will legitimately decide to go to South Carolina over Georgia or Alabama. That would never happen in the Big Ten. The Big Ten's so perfectly set up right now because the Big Ten, there's a tighter concentration of talent. The good players are going to go to 3 or 4 programs. They're not choosing Wisconsin. They're not choosing Michigan State. That's just not going to happen. In the SEC, dude, Arkansas gets some players. Like South Carolina gets players. And you'll look at them and you'll say, what are you doing? Well, those places disproportionately take football more serious. And so the trade-off is, and here's what sucks in the end, none of your teams may be as good as Ohio State or Indiana. We'll see. But the middle pack, they still beat up on you, and you may go in there and beat them 20-9 or something like that in week 7, but your training room looks no less crowded that following Sunday morning just because the team you played had a bad record. And now they're going to sign up for more of those. Look, the Kalen DeBoer Year 2 experiment, as it's not an experiment, the era, Year 2, is still playing out. I'm gonna reserve judgment. You know, we can do the post-mortem once their season's done. It's not done now. They're going to the playoff. I kind of thought both of these teams last night should be proud to get to that moment. I mean, if you know, like the public injury report is only a small part of the story for that team right there. I mean, I would argue it's far worse than the injury report made it look. Georgia's the same way. Okay, so both of the teams can say this, but Georgia won, so you don't have to contextualize it. With Alabama, they're banged up badly. They're going to play a game. They got at least one more game they get to play against Oklahoma. Let's see how that thing plays out. You know, because I'm still an extremely high believer in Kalen DeBoer in these big leverage situations. Let's see how that looks. But overall, just kind of offensively, I just felt like they had nowhere to turn. Georgia gave them nowhere to turn. Their own execution, or lack thereof, gave them nowhere to turn.